I'm born in 1962 in the USA, Mountain View, California. That's where I would grow up. Born to immigrant family. So immigrated from the Netherlands to South Africa, then South Africa to America. My mother and father were both Dutch citizens when I was born in America. So that makes it different, somewhat like similar situations for other people. Immigrant families, so we learned Dutch at home. We didn't learn English until school days and everything else, so made for a little bit of fun. But since my brother was a little older, 2 years before I went to school, he was having problems in school, so my parents went to English with us at home. So by the time I got to school, I knew a little bit more English than my brother did starting school. So my early school years were a little bit easier and a little bit better. Growing up in California, beautiful state, it's warm, good seasons can go around. Childhood was normal childhood. Play with kids, go to school, get your education, this one, that one. After I graduated school at the age of 16 in 1979, I did another year in the restaurants. Then I went to work for a couple computer companies. Made some good money, worked for computer companies, but I didn't like it. Too much drugs and alcohol. Not what I would later like to have done in life. But you're young, you do that kind of stuff. So those were the early years. And then after a few years of working, I got ready to start to travel. Yana.
Good morning.
Good morning. Where?
Mama.
Get for me?
Mama.
No, you have to get.
Mama.
No, this is Dada's. Mama's. Where's yours? Mama's, yeah. Get yours. No.
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 No. I'd traveled before, mostly during the holidays, down to Mexico by bicycle and with my uncle and other people to celebrate the holidays down in Mexico, since I didn't celebrate with the family in America when I was about probably 15, 16. Started my parents, because that's the only time my dad could get vacation from his business. So my parents would take their vacation together, and then me and my brother were free to go with friends or do whatever we wanted. So I started to learn to go down to Mexico for Christmas, because it's next door to California. Easy bike ride, it's warm. So the season is warmer down in Mexico than it is in California by a little bit. So I would ride down there, spend about a month or two over the Christmas holidays, and then come back up to the States. So I started that when I was about 14, 15. But those were my first kind of real trips with bicycle. Then when I came back, like I say, I started to work. And my first real long bicycle travel was, I think, 1986. I started traveling. I flew to Europe, and for about 6 months I traveled all around Europe. At that time, Europe was different than it is today. Every country was its own country. There was no such thing as Schengen. So every border you had to cross, you had to go get your passport stamped and this and that. So for 6 months, I cycled from the Netherlands, from family, around all of Europe, down to France, up around, through Yugoslavia, back around Germany, this and that. Went for 4 countries in one day for my birthday to have a beer. So I went from Luxembourg to Belgium to Germany, or Netherlands to Germany, or Germany to Netherlands, for 4 beers in each country for one, and a passport stamp for my birthday in that year. And I met a lot of fellow travelers at that time, young people traveling from Australia and other countries. And they all started talking about their home countries and places to see and interesting places and Asia and different things. So when I got back at the end of that year, I went back to work in the restaurants, started making some money. Then I decided the next year to cycle again. I wanted to go overseas, but my mom had suggested I first cycle across the United States to see the country I was raised in. So I cycled from California all the way across to New York, to Washington, D.C., up around. I met up with my brother in Long Island because he was doing sailboat racing at that time. And then I cycled all the way back to California, and that took me almost a year. And then I took a break for a few odd months, went back to work, made some money, started making my plans, today we look on a computer or a little cell phone for flight options. And at that time, instead, I looked in the newspaper. And during that time, they had what were called around the world flights. So you would fly all the way around from like San Francisco to Europe to another place, then to another place, then to another place, and then all the way back around to Asia, and then back around to America. So I looked into flights like that and realized I could fly to one place, get off with a bicycle, cycle across a few countries or something to the next airport, then pick up a month or 2 later a flight from there, and then continue on my around the world journey. So for my first flight, I think I paid something like $1,000 or so, and it was good for 1 year flying. So my first flight was back into England, and then from England we went to Russia, and then from Russia flew down to Africa. So I went to Kenya, cycled around Kenya, down through Kenya, through parts of Africa, then back to Kenya, and then from there I flew to, I think it was India. I cycled across part of India, and then from India I flew, I think it was to Australia. That was the next stop from Australia. Then in Australia I got to Cairns, cycled down from Cairns to Sydney to visit friends. And there I found out about the really cheap flights back into Asia at that time. So during my break, I'd only spent about a half a year about this time. Season was getting to be about winter time in Australia. So my friend suggested, well, why don't you go to Asia for the summer? So I flew up from there to Singapore. Then from Singapore, I cycled up to Bangkok, around through Malaysia, across into Cambodia, Vietnam. Vietnam at that time, we were only allowed to go halfway up the country because they were still not completely changed after the war there. This was about 1988, so the world was a lot different then. So I had to cross back into Laos, went back to Thailand, and then from there I flew to Hong Kong, from Bangkok to Hong Kong, and then from Hong Kong I went into China, mainland China. That was my first experience of mainland China. I went into, you had to take the ferry from Hong Kong into Guangzhou because there were no roads or cities going from Hong Kong to Guangzhou at that time. So I took the ferry into, or a little boat into Guangzhou. And then from Guangzhou I was allowed to cycle around with a bicycle. This would be my first attempt to get a Tibetan visa. So I went to the special government place in Beijing and I applied for my Tibetan visa. But of course, we all know that those years weren't good years in China, so before I could leave the country, they canceled my visa to Tibet. That was 1988. So around the time of the Tiananmen Square stuff, so they changed their mind to what was going on. So I had to leave the country back to Hong Kong, so I had to take a train in between to get back. Then from Hong Kong, I flew to Korea. From Korea, I cycled from Seoul all the way down to the bottom of Korea. Then I got a ferry boat across to Japan. Then I cycled up from the ferry boat from Japan all the way up to Tokyo. And then from Tokyo, I worked my way back and then got back to Seoul, Korea. And then from Seoul, I flew all the way back. The flight brought me all the way back to Australia. And then in Australia, I went across. It was back to spring and summertime there. So I took a flight over to New Zealand. I went to New Zealand for a few months of cycling in New Zealand. Then from New Zealand back to Tasmania. Tasmania back to the mainland of Australia, across to Perth. And then from Perth, it was a flight back to, I think it was Fiji at that time. Spent a few days in Fiji doing some scuba diving and some other things. Then the next stop was Hawaii. I spent about a week or two in Hawaii, then back to San Francisco and back home. So that was my first around-the-world trip. So I got a real good taste for these around-the-world trip flights. And then I had to go back to work for a little while. And then as soon as about 6 months or so came around, I planned my next bike trip. Family supported me as far as when I came home. I always had a house to go to when I first got back home until I could get a job and everything else. And quite a few times since I was only back in America for 2 or 3 months before I would start another bicycle tour. I would usually go back to my parents' house, spend maybe a couple months, make some money. As soon as I had gotten enough money to go again, I got my bike and I took off, because my next trip would take me from California up through Canada, up into Alaska, and up to the farthest point north. And then from there I cycled back down. And then when I got back to San Francisco on my way back to Coastal Road, again I stopped at my parents' house, worked for a couple months to make a bit more money. And then after that I headed back down towards Mexico, and Mexico into South America, and cycled all the way across Central America, Nicaragua, San Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico. Then from Panama, there's no road from Panama to South America. It's called the Darien Gap, very difficult and dangerous to pass. So I chose to fly from Panama City into Colombia. And then from Colombia, since I was down in the coastal town, I went over to Venezuela, then looped back, did a short loop from Venezuela back into Colombia, then up into the Andes, then the Andes across from Colombia to Ecuador. Ecuador, I went and visited a cousin of mine. She was doing some work there at the time. And then we went to the Galapagos Islands because when you're there, you may as well do that one. It's an adventure of a lifetime. This is where the animals have no fear of human beings. Sit next to a seal and some other things. And then went back to Guatemala. Back from Galapagos to Ecuador. Then Ecuador back up the Andes, which is a 5,000 meter straight up climb from the coastline. So you just climb up the mountain. This bike took me over a day and a half to cycle up to the top of the mountain. Then once you're at the top, you're back over the plateau. You're into the Andes Plateau. Cycle that down all the way down from Ecuador to Peru, Peru to Bolivia, past Machu Picchu, all the normal sites, a bunch of other stuff, into Bolivia, Bolivia into Chile, Chile around to Argentina, Argentina back up around to Paraguay, then Uruguay, then Brazil, and then back there. I had some issues, and so I flew home back again from Paraguay, back to the United States, and then took a few months of work again to make some money again. The first 20 years is growing up. Then after that, I started the travel phase for about 10 years, from about the age of 23, 24 to 31 or 2. I did traveling around the world. That's when I did all the bike adventures. Then the next stage of my life, when I came back, I did about 4 or 5 years of just kind of recovering from getting sick. Then I went back to Asia, went to Nepal, India, Nepal, and Tibet. Finally got into Tibet and finished my learning from stuff that I'd learned earlier in India, to find out what I'd learned in India was a completely different Buddhism than what I wanted to learn. So when I got into Nepal and Tibet in '99, I really went from Vedic Buddhism to Nepali Tibetan Buddhism, learning that. Then I spent my time in Tibet. I cycled to Lhasa over the mountains from Nepal to Lhasa. By bicycle, was allowed to do it at that time. Then back, because wasn't permitted to go from. It was a different kind of visa back then, so I couldn't just take the same visa and go into mainland China. It was good for only, even though it was a Chinese visa, it was only good for Tibetan area, not for mainland, so I had to go back to Nepal. And that was in '99, and I went back to some other Asian places, Myanmar, Burma, Vietnam again, and some other places, and then back to the USA. After that trip, I kind of stopped traveling for about 10 years. I tried what we all call the normal life. I did my meditation. I did Maharishi meditation. I started advancing my meditation stuff and my Vedic practices, learning Jyotish and some other things. Doing my cooking for my main job. And I did that for about the next 2000 to 2013. It's about 13 years. And then in 2013, well, you kind of met me along the way. That's when I started cycling again, and since then, I've been back on the road. Sometimes I travel with friends that I have met along the way. So I'll travel small, maybe a few months with some friends. And here, sometimes a little too friendly, a little too much want me to stop for photos.
Ричард Хакет сразу стал объектом повышенного внимания у аргентин. Еще бы, турист исколесил весь мир в любом уголке планеты. Здесь, в частности, впечатляет.
Mizunguko ya mjini hapa kwa sababu tunapaswa kwenda Arusha.
Flags on top of hillsides or on top of Mandalas here in Tibet or the Mongolian region is very popular among the locals, usually a blue scarf showing the sky, asking for blessings, for the wind to take your blessings to all your friends or family, whoever you've blessed, until the blessing flag has worn out and then the blessing has been completed. Well, the reason I become Buddhist is I grew up, my dad is Catholic. My dad is Catholic, his family is Catholic. My mom's family is basically nothing. They have no religion. They kind of just believe in spirits and other things, depending on the family member. My dad, when I'm growing up, we never went to church. My dad never went to church, but he was Catholic, so I learned about that. I learned about the other stuff. But since we never went to church, just saw what other friends did, I didn't like what I saw, didn't believe how they said things, so I started questioning it for myself. And then later, when I started to travel the world, I saw different religions practiced different ways in different countries, more so than in the United States. And then when I got to India, somewhere in the 80s, late 80s, in India I started seeing the Hinduism, this very big spiritual, religious, yoga, this, that, the next thing. So I started to learn. I looked at a couple of them. Wasn't interested in Hinduism, 3,000, 8,000, 2,000 gods. Really wasn't my cup of tea. Turned out some other things. And then a friend of mine there introduced me to, as we got closer to Nepal area, to Buddhism, which is not a religion, but is a philosophy. So I tried to understand what is the difference in between this religion and what they called philosophy. So in the 80s I learned about the Vedic tradition, which goes back before Hinduism and all that, and the principles that the Vedics had brought later into Buddhism. But it became a philosophy, not a religion. So I started learning the different people, the different gods, the different things, how everything was connected. I like Ganesh, the elephant god, the remover of obstacles. Because in life we have a lot of obstacles that need to be removed. So I went to do that. But then the more I studied, I tried an ashram here, an ashram there in India. Like I say, the Hinduism, the other ones, it really wasn't my thing. But when I got to the Buddhist temple, and I spent 1 month in the Buddhist temple, I learned a very simple life. We did a little bit of chanting, not like I do today, a little bit of meditation, we did chores, we did things, just daily life. And it seemed more reasonable, and I started practicing it a little bit more, diving into it, and learning a bit more. Then as I traveled on to Myanmar, later I did another temple in Myanmar. There I learned to walk with a begging bowl, learn humility, learn some other of the aspects of the Buddhist philosophy. There it's turned more into a religion, but still the basics are the philosophy. So I kind of liked it. And then into Thailand, even more religious like Buddhism, but also you can get to a lot of temples and a lot of monasteries where it's still more philosophy-like, and the practices and the stuff was good. And like I say, started in 1980 something. I didn't call myself Buddhist until probably in the 90s when I started saying, okay, I believe in the Buddhist philosophy, mid-90s. And then I wanted to go to places like Tibet and learn more about the Tibetan Buddhists, because I saw that was even a little bit more different. I'd already been now by then to Korea and Japan, saw the offshoots, Taoism, Taoism, but the different forms of Buddhism. And I started learning from different teachers to take what you can understand, let the rest go, take it as a seed. If someone tells you something, it's like being planted a seed of knowledge. Maybe later you'll understand it when your level is to understanding it, this and that. I liked some of the practices and principles, but again, I don't like when it becomes religious. I like it when it stays more a philosophy, and this is what we choose to do to find a path to a better being, a better enlightenment, or however you want to call it. Everyone has a different name for it. I call it just bettering oneself, so we become a better human being. If we are a better human being, people around us become better. Our actions, the way we look at the world, it becomes better, it becomes more peaceful. So it becomes easier, less stressful. What is Buddha? We are Buddha, from my experience, from what I've learned, from the teachings, from going back through looking at Indian teachings, looking at Nepali teachings, looking at Hindu teachings, looking at all the different teachings. If I go back to the original, what Buddha is we are Buddha. Everyone is born with the ability to be a Buddha within, a person who can reach a higher, better person. So therefore, we're all born with a Buddhist thing, but as we get taught by society, depending on where we grow up, we get taught whatever the society says is right, is wrong, is this, is that, this is how you do things, this is how you do things. Whether or not you chase money more than something else, chase happiness, contentment. These are all things I found around as I've traveled around the world. I see that the world teaches us or brainwashes us to see something different than the simplicity of life. After all, we are, even though we call ourselves human, we're still an animal. So we still have basic needs like everyone else. Eat, sleep, do our daily business, and find the happiness, whatever your goal of happiness is. Well, with human beings, happiness becomes very, very complicated because we're told we need a house. Okay, house is simple. It can just be simple walls like I build for my cat shelters. Just something to keep warm and keep nice and keep safe from the elements in. Versus man wants $1 billion house with all these fancy items and these fancy things and all this paintings and this and art and all these material objects. When you become more Buddhist-like, it's just things. We can't take them with us when we die, so why are we getting all these things? Why am I spending my entire life trying to get all these things that I cannot take with me elsewhere? But things that I do with Buddhism is like sharing my food with the cats, sharing my food with the dogs, helping other human beings. That's stuff I can enjoy now and take with me into the next world because it's a part of what becomes, as some would say, your spirit, your soul, whatever you want to call it. It becomes part of your being. Last night, campsite got demolished. 40, 50 mile an hour winds last night. Coming through, pushing the hammock all over the place. Knocking the bike over, knocking everything down last night. Big mess out of everything, but we'll clean it up and get going. In my research, then I learned what is called moving meditation, which is my favorite meditation. And you just get your mind into a state of, well, they call it bliss. I call it just contentment, happiness. And so when I bicycle around the world, I'm in this state of consciousness that allows me to absorb meditation while bicycling, chanting. Occasionally I'll pick up my maul or something else and recite the Om Mani Padme Hum, 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 Om Mani Padme Hum. Or I'll do some of the other chanting that I believe are good. I've learned some from different masters. If I eat meat or something else, Om Bharat Hazaraham, to bless the meat, to ask for forgiveness that I've eaten meat. When people give me meat or something else, or I decide I need that day a hamburger or something else, because I'm human. So Buddha says we still have one of the teachings I was learned very hard after learning meditation was when you meditate too much, you get into a field of consciousness like the monks do. They become very conscious about the meditation, very conscious about that, but they're not conscious in the outside world. Well, unfortunately, I still have to, I'm not a monk, so I have to work in the outside world. So I also I have my spiritual world. So it's like keeping one foot in the spiritual world and one foot in the real world. You have to find a balance between the two, because it's very difficult. If you meditate too much, you only concentrate on meditation, this, that, and you neglect family, friends, outside life of this. Until I go to the stage of becoming, I learn more and whatever they want to say, come to another level, and then I've decided that I want to become nothing but spiritual, then I can take my foot out of the other world. But in the meanwhile, I live in a world, like I said, that is brainwashed, that I need a house, I need possessions, I need a few things. So I try to keep my possessions and my stuff down to a minimum. I don't have attachment to things anymore. I learn to just, I use when I no longer have use for it. I find someone else that has use for it, and I just give it away. The item will find its purpose in life, being used. Since I'm no longer using it, why am I keeping it? So many people keep stuff in the house, keep stuff everywhere, collect things, and then for what? The item just sits there not being used, not for the purpose it was brought into this world to do something. So that's how I feel with that one. I've had a few houses in America, different stages of my life. Like I say, different levels. As we learn something, someone plants a seed, we learn a little more, we become to another level, we become to this. During a few years of my life, after I had traveled and done a lot of stuff, the first realm of my first 10 years of travel, I went back to the States after being sick. I started getting sucked back into, as people would say, back into the normal brainwashing part of life. I started losing bits of my meditation and everything else. The practice was becoming less and less. I was becoming more. I had the girlfriend. I bought the house. I was working more, saving money, building stuff, building more money, bigger house, better things, sold the house, better house, new house, taking care of the girlfriend, needing the requirements that need there. Again, still practicing my TM, practicing my meditation, but just not the same as I do now, not like the moving meditation. So after a few odd years, I started missing that, and I changed back to, that's the years that I traveled to Tibet, and then again reinforced my views on Buddhism, this and that, and tried to find a better balance when I came back. So I moved to out to Iowa, and then in Iowa that's where I was last living. I built a house there that was specifically designed for Vedic principles. So it's like, I would almost say, a temple house. It's built kind of like a temple house. So the house was very simple. You would walk in, open area, sort of like this house is, open area. The backside had a kitchen. Everything was facing feng shui or Vedic directions for peace and harmony. Bedroom was simple. The stuff was there. inside the house, I had a lot of tapestries and different things hanging around the house to remind me of meditation and this one and that one. I started work at the university, and there I was a chef. So I was cooking organic vegetarian food for all the kids there for about 3.5 years. I also worked at a place called Zaraj, which was a Vedic place, again, cooking medical stuff, learning from Vajas, basically, I guess I would call a big type monk. They're monks that chant and bless, but also the Vajas are doctors that know all the principles of the history of the natural healing from the Vedic, which is part of Buddhist teachings, also found in Chinese TMC. This all comes from the Vedic principles, so all comes to the same. Ayurveda to that one, the difference is, and like in Ayurveda, they don't believe in the needles like acupuncture does, but they just believe in acupressure, because it's just like I say, as we evolve, we learn different balances and different levels of our enlightenment, and sometimes one view takes it one way, another view takes it another way. So I had the houses, I did that. I went to what was, like we say, called more normal life, but then I started having problems. Life became more difficult. People, of course, that I was around were doing things that weren't right, being less spiritual, less in harmony with nature. So it became difficult, and I decided after a while with problems, I was going to sell everything and start a life of travel again. So in 2013, I sold everything I owned, gave most all my possessions, but maybe about 2 boxes worth of possessions, mostly my Buddhist items, my spiritual items, but even a lot of those I gave to friends that believed in it and everything else, and I gave all my possessions away. And I left the United States in 2013 with a bicycle and 4 bags, and started on the road back to finding spiritual peace and happiness. Sometimes when you're riding, you get real good luck. You look alongside the road, and the road gives you gifts. One of the big misconceptions people have is, there's cultural differences and these things. We all culturally have the same needs. We all need a place to sleep. We all need food. We all need shelter. This. After that, then every culture has a way of looking at things. Whether or not we embrace everything is about family, or everything is solo, family gets to a certain point and then we separate families out more, or with that. So for example, in the Western culture, we're not very family oriented. In other words, we're born, we live with our parents, and at a certain age we'll move out from our parents and we'll start separating and starting our own lives with most people with minimal stuff from their parents influencing their lives after a certain point in time. If you look at the Hispanic culture, our neighbor in America, most of them, when they haven't been in America for too long and start to become westernized, they come in, they're very family-oriented. Everything will be done for the family, the immediate family, and the outer family. So if someone is, for example, like I had people working for me, they would make money, but a percentage of their money was sent home to mother, to brothers, to cousins, to make sure they could have school, they would have a business, or they would have a house. So even though they made money in America, they would take a percentage only to live on, to survive in America. The rest was sent home to maybe a brother, a mother, a father, or an uncle to build a business or a house to take care of the family back home. And this is one of the teachings that goes on. You see the same in Asia. The families usually group together, take care of each other, watch each other's children, watch the grandchildren, so on and so forth. The Western culture, we don't. We are more independent, so We have a child. Okay, if the child needs watching, the grandparents usually aren't the ones watching unless money is very low. But as soon as you have a little bit of money, you take the child and you put it in a daycare or a kindergarten or something like that. Some people in the United States and some Western people still, if they have outside cultures, because we all come from somewhere else in the United States, some will still have the child stay with the grandparents, etc., or this or that. But for the most part, once you become more westernized, child goes to school. School takes care of the child for so many hours a day. You don't do this one. So our family system kind of breaks up versus the other one. But this is kind of how the world sees it. No matter what country you come from, your country must take care of your own country first. First, you take care of your own country, then you help others. And the thing is, it's the same with a person. Me, if I'm not healthy, if I don't feel good, how can I help somebody else? So if I don't take care of myself first, spiritually, mentally, and physically, how can I help someone? If I'm old and frail, how can I help someone that is in trouble, needs picking up, lifting? If I keep myself in health, I have enough health to help somebody else when they fall or something else. Spiritual, same way. If I have good spiritualness and this, when someone who is feeling down and feeling missing stuff, and if I have good spiritual value, I can help them by showing them, like in Buddhism, it's simple. We can help others come up. So this is one of the things, you must take care of yourself first. This is not, people would say it's selfish. No, there is a point where it's selfish. That's because everything you do is only for you, only to build you, only to make this. But if you take care of yourself first, and with that, when abundance comes, you take the abundance and you help others with the abundance, then this is a good thing, because this helps you with kindness, empathy, and all the Buddhist teachings. It helps you to give back. And when you give back, sometimes, as some would say, in other religions or other faiths, karma would come, and karma gives you back more. Well, then you get more again, and you can give more, and then you are staying healthy. But you always must take care of oneself first, because if you don't, how do you help somebody else? When I studied what's called, Jyotisha, which is the stars. It's a form of astrology. It's one of the first astrologies that's out there. It's according to it, we're born with our karma at the time of birth. So we're born with a destiny and a finishing place. It's all been written before, as soon as we were born. Some of the Buddhist scriptures also talk of this. Our destiny, our thing is done. The thing that is not written, according to even Vedic astrology, Buddhism, and the other stuff, the ones I've learned and I've studied, is the path to get there. We can make the path easy, or we can make the path hard. In Vedic astrology, the word is to bring to light. In other words, if something's in the dark, I can't see it. If I can't see it, I can trip over it, I can fall, I can hurt myself. I don't know what it is. But if I shine a light on it or bring it into the light, I can see that there's a rock in front of me, so I don't step on the rock and trip over it. I walk around it. I do the other things. I take the natural path. Buddhism somewhat teaches the same thing. We must enlighten ourselves. And in part of enlightening ourselves is to see the good in everything. Nothing is 100% good. Nothing is 100% bad. Just because I trip over a rock, it doesn't mean the rock was bad. The rock did nothing but its nature. It just was a rock. It just sat there. So I was the one that inflicted pain on the rock. not the other way around. I tripped on the rock because I did not pay attention to see the rock. And this is, I think, one of the biggest things as human beings we forget, is everything in life has a nature. A dog has a nature, a cat has a nature, people have nature, everything has natures. And if we don't recognize these natures, we cause friction and harm. And this is one of the teachings that I learned early on that I fully believe in. We in Buddhism are allowed to do anything we want to do. We can do anything. But there's a clause to that. But we cannot intentionally harm others. So people say, well, I don't understand that. Well, in other words, if I kick you and you say, excuse me, you hurt me, I apologize for doing that and I ask for the forgiveness for that. Then after that, I should never do that action again. Because now I know it causes harm. So I've learned. So I've come another step up. So this is something I fully believe in, that as we learn things, if we keep doing something, we choose bad action. And that's our choice to continue to do something. If we tease somebody and it hurts them, it's one thing. If we tease someone and it's fun and it's jest, there's no harm. So therefore, you can do it. But sometimes when you joke with somebody and they get very upset, very sad in this, we've caused harm upon them. And therefore, we shouldn't do that action again because we are causing harm. But when you make a joke with somebody and they're laughing and they understand the joke and they get along with it, what is the harm in that? There is no harm. So this is the problem that's become big in today's society, is so many people are taking offense to things that, well, according to Buddhism, we should not take offense to. But if they take offense to it, of course, even though it's something that why or somebody should take offenses, but if they do, to that person, we need to not do that action again, if we can remind ourselves to not do that action. But to others, it doesn't mean to the next person, I can't do the same action. I don't do the action to this person, but it doesn't mean I can't do the action to this person. Maybe this person doesn't mind this action because they've evolved enough to understand there is no harm, there is no ill intent in it, there's no maliciousness in it, and there's no this or that. It's the simplicity of, if you look at a child calls someone fat, calls someone skinny, calls someone this. What is the harm in it according to Buddhism? It's just a description. It's how a person looks, it's how a person is, it's how a person is. It's a description. But yet, because we taught in school that it's harmful to people, it's this or this. Why is it harmful? I don't understand why it's harmful from a Buddhist perspective. There is no harm in it. But I must respect that if the person I'm telling, you look fat, and they take offense to this, I must now realize and have the compassion to say, I realize this person takes offense to this. So therefore, I'm causing harm to this person if I use this terminology. So with this person, I must no longer use this terminology or try to refrain from using this terminology with this person, because to them, their stage of enlightenment or their stage of being finds offense to something that me and others do not find offense to. So that's how it is. And that's one thing I like about Buddhism. You can do everything, and there is no judging in it. It's this, but you yourself have to control your actions to make sure that you're not causing harm to another human being. I chat with my mom just about every day now. I keep in contact with my mom. My dad passed away a few years ago, so I'm no longer in contact with him. Well, unless you want to say via meditation and spirituality, I think of him. I think of family members that have passed, so in that way we are always in contact with them. They're always still around. So this is how it is. You know, distance, people say that it's something that I was taught at an early age. Distance doesn't make you no longer feel for a person, be attached to a person, or connected to a person. It just means they're physically not next to you. It doesn't mean that they're not still connected to you in your heart, in your spirit, in your mind. And that's important. Communication with the person. Luckily nowadays, compared to when I first started traveling, I would have to send a letter by mail, which might not come home for 2, 3 months, 4 months, come out of order and everything else. Nowadays, I can pick up the phone, click on it, send an email. As soon as my mom or whoever gets on the other end, they answer the computer, they do that one. Can send messages, WeChat, WhatsApp, and people will see it when they open their thing up to look themselves. So again, I don't control when they see it or how they see it, but I send it, and at their end, when they are open to receiving it, they open their app or do their thing. Same with me. If I get up in the morning, it's not the first thing I do. I don't go to my emails, I don't go to my mails. I go to now back to more of my practice of getting my mind and set for the day and everything else. And then after I've done my morning chores, my other things, and packed up, if I'm on the road, pack up my tent. If I'm at home, make up my bed, clean my room, do my stretching, do my stuff, get my mind, do a little bit of meditation, eat my breakfast, make sure if I'm on the bicycle ride, I break down my camp that is packed up, it's ready to go. And then during that time, I check my emails, I check my other things. Again, one step in one world, one step in the other world. I check my emails, I check everything else. Okay, if there's anything I have to respond to right away that requires my full attention at that time, that's immediate attention, I take care of that first before I go on the road. So I'll send an email, or I'll set up sending money or paying bills or doing other things. And then once I go on the road, or if I'm at home, I'll do my chores and I'll do my stuff until it's my lunchtime and I'm hungry. And then I repeat the process. I have my lunch, I have my drink, I do my calmingness a little bit for that. I might do a little bit of meditation or something if I'm doing that. Then I'll check my emails, I'll check my stuff, I'll check anything that I did for business earlier in the day to make sure if it had to be something that had to be answered right away, that's been sent, that somebody at the other side answered. If not, I will send a second email or something, or try to get a hold of the person to make sure the business is done. And then I go on with my day. Well, probably one of the things that annoys me most about my fellow bikers and other travelers is not taking responsibility. Well, as we see here by my setup, it rained last night. Brother, did it pour last night. It came down cats and dogs. I was lucky enough I got my tarp set up because I was foolish, and barely just in time before the big rainstorm hit, and I couldn't set up the rest until a little bit later. But we always blame the weather. Don't take responsibility ourselves for our actions and our choices. The weather is the weather. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just the weather. If we have the right gear, as you see here, a nice hammock that hangs off the ground so it's dry all night long. Keep the bike dry under a tarp. We have a nice tarp. We have all our cooking. We can cook down here. We can do everything down here. Sit down here comfortably out of the rain, everything else. Have a nice jacket on, have everything else on. The weather doesn't bother us. So it wasn't the weather that was bad. It was my choices that were bad. My choices to pull off on a road, not set up before the rain comes, not have a jacket, not have a proper tent, not have a proper setup to be ready for the weather, and basically not the right equipment for the right job, and therefore it was my mistake, not the weather that was bad, but my actions. And this is the biggest thing we need to take responsibility for, boys and girls. If we have the right gear and the right stuff, we can bike and travel through anything. It's not the stuff, it's our actions, our choices, and our gear. I don't get support. This is because I guess I could say, some would say I've been blessed. I have a blessed life. I worked very hard at a young age, even though people would say, but you say you traveled a lot. Yes, but in between I worked. And when I work. I'll work 12, 13, 14, 15 hours a day, 6 days a week, 7 days a week. I'll do whatever it takes to get the job done, to get the stuff, to make what I need to make, to ensure that it's that. And then I don't, during the time of working, I don't take much time off. I'll take a day off here and do my stuff and do the things, but my goal is to build up something so I can take 6 months, 7 months, 8 months of travel. And that was my purpose in the young days. And then sometimes along the way I would get low on money, so I would go to a hostel, a hotel or something. Because I was a chef, I would look and see their food and say, you don't know how to cook this, you don't know how to do that. If you give me a place to sleep, you give me some food and a little bit of money, I will teach your staff how to make and do these things. So sometimes I was lucky. The big hotels would need people to teach simple Western things, French toast, pancakes, just simple stuff. But it still takes, you have to cook this a while with the cooks, let them understand the texture, let them understand how things work, this and that. So it takes a few weeks. So I would be granted a little bit of, sometimes the owner of the place would say, I make a lot more money now because of what you taught my cooks. I will give you a blessing. So I would take a little blessing. But in general, the money I made was my money. Even like now, I sold my house in America. I got okay money for it, and I reinvested it into a few things. And so now I'm able to live humbly off that. I don't require much. With the bicycle, it's extremely easy. For transportation to get everywhere from point A to point B, it's bicycle. So what money do I pay? Nothing. Once I have bought the bicycle, I paid for the bicycle, I paid for the equipment that's on the bicycle to hold everything, there's no expense. Zero. So I pay no expense to get from point A to point B. So it's not like somebody who's in a city takes a taxi cab, takes the bus, takes the train, takes the plane, or something else. Of course, there are times where I have to take a train or a plane, but not like someone else who would travel every day. The next thing is food. Everyone has to eat every day, so we eat. Well, if you eat local food, simple local food, what the locals eat, and you cook a good percentage of your own food is pretty cheap in most places. You eat simple and good food. Another thing to do is when I travel, a lot of times you see a farm, and you see the farmers working in the field. And sometimes I'll wave to the farmer, can I take a cabbage, or can I do this? Can I pick cabbage with you for maybe 1 hour, put the cabbage in a bunch of boxes, and now I can take a cabbage. And sometimes they'll give me a free cabbage. Sometimes you ride on the road, you'll see a cabbage that's fallen off the truck. So it's a blessing, I'll take the cabbage. And whatever else I get and find, and fruit and stuff, and then buy the remainder. Since I don't eat much meat, I'm mostly vegetarian, therefore the price of most of the stuff I buy is quite inexpensive. And since I normally, with the bicycle, I travel to places that are warmer, I try to go to the northern hemisphere in the months of May, June, July, August, September, October. I try to spend in the north hemisphere where it's summer there and warmer. Then when it becomes towards winter time, I head to the southern hemisphere, which is starting November, December, January, February, March, April. And there I go to the southern hemisphere, where again, it's warm. So you'll always have fresh vegetables, food, and everything at a cheaper, more reasonable price because it's normal season to grow and everything else. So this keeps the food prices down, keeps everything down. And also when you travel where it's warm, comes to the next stage of earthings, accommodation. Where do you sleep? So for me, I hang in a hammock most of the time. So most my travel, I find places to hang my hammock between the trees, and I sleep in a hammock at night. I cook with my stove, and I make a little bit of food, and I make my food in this. So my meals are easy, cheap, and this and that. But with the hammock, I pay, again, once you've bought the equipment of a tent or a hammock, what is your cost to sleep for the night? Zero. I pay no money for a place to sleep. I sleep under the stars. I sleep with nature, sleep with the beauty, sleep like the Buddhas had done in the past. The monks walking. I sleep in the open. Of course, I have a nice hammock. Keeps me warm. But this is one of the tricks. And then about maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, I go to a place like a hostel or something that is considered inexpensive. Place to sleep for the night, to get a proper bathing, because at least once to twice a week, every 2 weeks, one has to bathe properly, and a good shower to wash and clean and get yourself, take care of yourself, because daily, people will say, well, daily you take care of yourself. Yeah, I wash with water, wash with a little soap, wash with my towel. I then rinse my towel off after I've washed my body, and I've taken out of the bucket water or the river and with a little soap and washed. And then I wring my thing out, I wash this and I wring it out, I dry my towel, put it back on my bicycle. And that's my bathing practice for the day. I don't use regular toothpaste. I use a powder toothpaste because I find it better, so I don't use chemicals there. So, brush my teeth the natural way, clean my teeth. Same with everything else, as much as natural as can be. So, again, this is very inexpensive. I don't put on harsh deodorants and all these special things because I'm outside, I'm in nature. The body, when you eat more natural food, doesn't have the harsher odors than normal, so long as you're, washing your stinkier parts, you're fine. So how do you support yourself? You lower your cost. You learn to live simple, as they would say. This becomes more the Buddhist style life. You become like a monk. You're traveling like a monk. You're walking, you're going. But I just happen to use a bicycle. It's much faster to go from place to place. In the early days, it was, as I said before, much more difficult with communication and everything else. As I traveled down through Mexico, there was one area where, very poor area, so they decided they wanted to rob me, or tried to rob me. So they got in, shoot guns at me and some other stuff, but luckily enough I was able to turn around and go downhill and get away from them. Had to find a guy to put my bicycle in the truck and take it over the mountain pass past where these guys were. In Mexico they're called banditos, and there's a few places where they are. In the old days it was more so than it is now. When I was in farther down in South America, Ecuador, one night I decided, I was at the hostel and some people invited me to go see a play or something just up the road from the hostel. So they had already left in a group, and I figured, okay, I had to still get cleaned up, and I came to join them. And on the way to join them, some guys mugged me, grabbed me from behind, put me in a chokehold, stole my wallet, stole my other stuff, and then ran away. One guy that was behind me ran this way, the other guy ran the other way. I chased the guy down, I grabbed him, I stopped him, and well, the way you deal with it in South America is you kick him and beat him and call him a dog. And then his friend across the street saw this, who had stolen my wallet, took the money out real quickly, threw the rest of my stuff on the ground, and ran away. That way I would have to let his friend go across the street and get my stuff. And in South America, that's the way you deal with it, because you can't go to the police, because if you go to the police will arrest them, beat them, all sorts of stuff for doing this to a tourist, and you'll end up having to pay the police a bribe to keep the police from killing the guys that robbed you. So it's kind of a different situation in that. Later times, Europe, I've had a few things stolen here and there, nothing major. Sick measurable times in India, definitely sick a few times. As far as robbing goes, like I said, just a few times here and there. People steal stuff, sometimes park the bike, steal little things. It's, it happens. There's differences in all the cultures. And in China, it's been especially different because I started going to China in the 80s already. And China is extremely different in the 80s than it was today. I think in the 80s it was much easier, could easily camp everywhere. All hotels took foreigners. There was never an issue with hotels and anything like that. Places to eat. We all went to the foreign places because, well, some of the food was a little less than in the 80s what the Westerner would eat, dog or cat or bugs and some other stuff. But when I started going back in later years, China had developed quite a bit and come along, and cities are bigger, and actually some of them are fancier than some of the Western cities. So I don't see a problem there. The differences in food. Culture-wise, China is a bit more family-oriented, standoffish, but at the same time, when they see a foreigner, everybody wants to quickly run and have their picture taken with you. And they don't quite understand sometimes you want to be left alone, or you're just doing something. For example, one time we were coming up one of the mountain passes in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, coming over a 5,000 meter pass, and I'm barely with my bike to the top of the hill, and people are running to take their picture with me, stopping me, and this, and it's extremely stressful and tiring because you just want to get to the hill and be able to take a little bit of breather and rest. And this is something I'm not used to, because in Western countries people would never do that. They'd wait till you've stopped and relaxed and then come over and talk to you and present themselves, not just run up with a camera or phone and quickly stick their head next to yours and take a selfie with you. So, I mean, there are some cultural differences, but in all, I mean, nothing that's ever that bad. It's just different. In my years of traveling, I've been over 130 something countries now. I just added a new 3 or another 2 in the last year, so it brought me up to about 133. A lot of the countries I revisit and just travel in different ways. I mean, take for example China. How big is China? I mean, people that live in China could spend decades just traveling from one side to the other. I've been to most every province in China. India, I've been every province but one. It means I've seen part of the provinces, but it means I haven't seen all the provinces, but I've traveled. How many kilometers I've traveled? 500,000 or more, easily. Over the decades, I mean, it's hard to tell. I stopped counting years ago because it no longer became important to me. There was a time in my life where it seemed important, but to me that became something, again, of ego, of being able to tell somebody, I've been 1,000,000 miles, I've been 5,000 countries, I've been. And if you hear those words, I is ego. It's selfishness. And it's something I'm trying to avoid and just be humble and be a cyclist like everybody else and enjoy when I meet someone who's traveled 2 or 3 countries and relive that excitement of going to new countries and seeing things for the first time and doing that and finding new routes and finding other places and countries I've been before just to see something different. Sometimes going back to places and see how much they've changed or haven't changed. And it's just nice. It's just part of the beauty of the world. Don't forget that when you leave a camping area, we take all our trash with us. Double check your equipment. Make sure you've got your flags to show. People can see who you are. Your kickstand. Got our solar panel ready to go. We've eaten. Everything's cleaned up. Our camp area is cleaned up. We've taken everything down. Packed everything up. But mainly, taking all our trash out with us. People need to look within themselves to find what really makes you happy. If it's a home and a house, and that's what makes you happy, then it's a home and a house. If you are constantly dreaming of someone else's life or someone else's thing, and you look and you live the life in envy, then what you're doing in your life must not be correct. Because if you're envious of something, then that seems to be what you want. It seems to be what you think is happiness. So you either have to change your view of that or you have to pursue that. That's about all I can tell people. It's like me. I like to travel. So I don't tell people I want to travel. I go and travel. If I want to do this for a while, I change something like I did before in my life, and I wanted to try something else, I stopped, I changed, I tried it. If it worked, I was happy. When it stopped working, I wasn't happy. I went back to something that made me happy. It's about all we can do. First, I would address for the older people, as Buddhist says, we wake up every morning with a new life. Every day I'm blessed with a new life every morning I wake up. So I can do whatever I want from that day forward. I just have to choose to do it. It's not an easy choice to just suddenly say, well, I'm going to do this or this. My suggestion would be take some small vacations, go to a few places, see if you even like it, see if it's still in your dream, see if it's still what you want to do. If it is, you just have to keep trying to do more and more. For me, I just went, I liked it, so the more I went, the more I kept liking it, the more I found ways to do it, the more I found tricks to make things cheaper and easier and better. I met other people that did it and asked from them what their experiences are, how they did it. And I made sacrifices. I had to learn to be away from family for long periods of time and everything else. So it's a choice. But as Buddha would say, you wake up every day, you're granted a brand new life. And from that day forward, you can choose if you want to change your life or not change your life. And that's how I like Buddhism so much, because it tells us if we wake up, if we're privileged enough to wake up, we can choose to change. As far as young people go in places like Asia and China, I understand it's difficult, but I've also met Chinese who are doing it and are cycling around China and going into other places. Is it as easy as it is for Westerners? I would say it's easy. The difference is the support. We, from a Western standpoint, are very much encouraged to do things on our own, to go out and do it on your own. And everything is you. You are responsible for you. But yet in Asia, where they practice Buddhism, where Buddha says you're in charge of yourself and you're responsible for yourself and you're responsible for your own actions, they choose not to do it. So it's funny that an area of the world that has been brought up on Buddhist teachings, where you are supposed to be self-reliant, these things and this stuff, they choose to rely on family more. Yet in the West, where we neglect most of these Buddhist things and go with Christianity and everything else, we instead rely on ourselves and do things for ourselves and support ourselves. So the thing is, I mean, it's like anything. I have friends in China, and they take small breaks. Just take the breaks you can, and when you can take a break, take it as long as you can and do it. And it's especially more important to do it while you're young, because when you're young, you can sleep anywhere. Your bones don't bother you, you don't have the aches and pains. You can ride much farther with the bicycle, you have much more physical energy, you have much more vibrance. You can do without a lot of things, you can take a lot more stress than you can when you're older. So it's a thing. And as far as finding balance, the unfortunate thing with balance is no one can tell you your balance. We can help lead you to it. We can plant seeds, like the thing says, like yin and yang. You plant the seed and it turns. And hopefully each time it turns, you come a little closer to finding a balance that works for you and be able to travel and do it. I think the biggest mistake, and it's even, you see it in the signs in China and in Asia now more so than everything else, people put such importance on spending tens of thousands of dollars on a wedding. What for? What is the purpose? Who is the wedding for? You are marrying someone. Do you need to spend half your life savings to marry someone and love someone? No. So to have spent all this money there, of course you have to work more to do everything else. Or your parents have spent all this money to get you wed. Then of course you have to pay them back and everything else. So the circle is a vicious circle of this spending money and impressing others. I understand the culture in China is to save face. And save face is, it's a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, you look good for everybody, but on the other hand, you have to pay the price for it. So I can't make this balance and this choice for you. As Buddha says, you must find your way and your path and your balance in this one. So all you can do is look at others and say, well, that may work for me, and try it. It either does or it doesn't. And each time you make a balance. And same with the people your family. If your family says, oh, you must do this and this, well, okay, I'll do this, but I'm not going to do all of this. Meet in the middle. And of course they may not like it, but after a while they'll get used to that you're not going to just every time give everything, and maybe then you have a little for yourself but enough for them, and then you find a balance. But balance is the hardest thing, because balance is individual. What works for one person to balance the scales doesn't work for the other. Good morning, world. Working our way back the dirt trails back to the main road from our camping areas. Sometimes I go far in for camping. Sometimes I just go right next to the road. Just depends on the conditions, the place, what we find, how the trees are, how I'm going to set up. A lifetime of stories, so there would be no point to start and no point to end. Like I say, it's an adventure. And sometimes people always say, why don't you write a book? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Because at this time, for me, I want this to be mine. It's probably, I don't know, Buddhism would say it's selfish, it's this, it's that. It's not ego. But I think sometimes when we do things like newspapers and this and that, that becomes ego, because then the newspaper makes us seem like more than we are. I'm just a simple person like everybody else, just cycling around the world, enjoying seeing what I can. But a newspaper will put this big story and to-do and hype of who you are and what you are and why you're so important or this or that. The feats, you're doing fantastic things. But yet each of us has the ability to do fantastic things in our own way. So why not find what's your way to do a fantastic thing and do that? Again, we're taught and brainwashed to believe, but if the news puts it there, he must be more important. I don't see it that way anymore. With the Buddhist principles, I no longer see this part of the world. So I think that's one of the better things, like I say, of Buddhism. It's taught me to be more humble, to see things, try to be more forgiving, try to be more compassionate, try to understand others more, try to accept things as they are, not what I want them to be. Find a balance in between what I've been taught, what I've untaught myself, and what I'm reteaching myself in the new world of balance.